There's going to come a time in your casting when you need to increase line speed in order to make the cast that needs to be made for that situation. And that could be anything from turning over a big bushy bass fly to handling a headwind to just being able to aerialize a lot of line in the air in order to make a long cast. So at that point, the power that you can get from your arm and from your rod may not be enough to make the cast that needs to be made. So at that time, our line hand is going to have to come into play, and it's going to have to help us increase the line speed or help us make the line go faster so that we can achieve whatever it is that needs to be done. That technique is a single or a double haul. It simply is a technique that we use to increase line speed. Doesn't do anything else for us. But that alone will be enough in certain situations to get the job done. There are a couple things to remember with a single and a double haul that if you keep these things in mind and you practice them and you get in the habit of using them, you'll find that even when you're trying to turn over a 25-foot cast on a trout stream with a big bushy fly, that you'll find yourself using a haul. So it's a technique, it's a way of increasing the line speed, and it's just going to clean up our cast and make a lot of other things happen easier for us. I think the easiest way to learn a double haul is to start with your hands together and think about what needs to be done through the casting stroke. So your hands are going to start out together. When the rod gets to my shoulder, right about here, or about 2/3 of the way through the casting stroke, my left hand is going to haul. It's going to go down and come right back up. And that's going to happen at the same place the rod is now stopping. The rod's going to progress through the casting stroke, and at the end of the haul, the rod tip is at the end of the casting stroke. The same thing happens coming forward. The rod's going to move about 2/3 of the way through the casting stroke. Right about here, I'm going to haul. My left hand's going to come down and back up, and by the time it's back up, my rod tip is stopping in the front. So the forward haul looks like this. Down, up, we're at the end of our casting stroke. So as you go back and forth, that's all that you need to practice. Down, up here at the end of the back cast. Down, up here at the end of the forward cast. Here on the back, here on the forward cast. The rod goes 2/3 of the way through the cast, and then haul, and the rod tip stops. 2/3 of the way through the cast, haul, and the rod tip stops. The reason we're letting the rod travel through so much of the casting stroke before we start the haul is that the only place the rod loads or bends or flexes is at the very end of the stroke, in the back and again in the front, at the end of the forward cast. And it has to be at that precise moment when the rod is loading that you're incorporating the haul in order for the rod to help with the cast, in order for the haul to do us any good. If we start the haul as soon as we start the cast, we can make it, we can incorporate it, and it may even feel good to us, but we've wasted most of that haul by spreading it out over the entire casting stroke instead of hanging on to it and putting it right at the very end where it's going to do us the most good. So for the maximum line speed and maximum efficiency, we need to wait until that very last part of the casting stroke in the back and in the front to apply the haul. What we're talking about when we say rod load is simply the bend or the flex at the end of the rod. It happens at the end of the forward cast when the rod stops in front of us, and it happens at the end of the back cast when the rod stops behind us. As the rod travels through the casting stroke, you can watch the rod load. It comes back, we stop the rod, the line goes back behind us, straightens out, and we start forward against that resistance that loads the rod Through the middle of the cast, the rod goes back to straight. At the end of the forward cast, the line again goes out in front of us, straightens out. We start our back cast against that load or that resistance, and the tip bends. So think about the tip as a diving board. The harder you jump on a diving board, the more bounce you get. Well, in fly fishing and fly casting, the deeper the rod loads, the more line speed you're going to get on the next cast. So it's important to have as much load as you can get out of your fly rod. And that's simply what the haul does. It helps us increase the rod load, which in turn increases the line speed, which in turn helps us turn over those big flies or deal with the wind or make those long casts. I think the best place to practice a haul is right here in the grass. And I also think it helps if you force yourself to stop at each end of the casting stroke long enough to think about what you have to do on the next cast and to get your hands into position for the next cast. It's kind of like rubbing your stomach and patting your head. I think part of the problem is that up until now that the line hand, in my case my left hand, has not played an important part in the cast, and now it's going to be a critical player. And our left hand is going to have to move fast. Our line hand and our rod hand doesn't change anything that it's always done. It's just going to continue to cast the line. It doesn't change tempo, doesn't change position, it doesn't change at all. All of the change takes place with our line hand here and here, here and here. And just because our left hand moves fast and our right hand doesn't, that's enough to confuse us for a little bit. So by stopping at each end of the casting stroke, it's going to help us wrap our head around what we have to do on the next cast. So we're going to start with our hands together. 2/3 of the way through the cast, we're going to haul and end up with our hands together and our rod tip stopped at the back end of the back cast. Coming forward, the same thing in reverse. We're going to start with our hands together. The rod's going to travel through 2/3 of the casting stroke and then haul and end up together. 2/3, haul, end up together. 2/3, haul, end up together. And that's all it is, but that's going to take a little practice. And the more you practice it, the smoother it's going to get. And pretty soon you won't have to let it come down on the grass at the end of every cast. Pretty soon your hands will be in position. You'll know what you have to do. And then you'll find that you're up in the air, you're double hauling, and it's getting easier with every haul that you make. And that's double haul. There are times though when we don't need a double haul. There are lots of times when a single haul is going to get the job done for us. A couple of instances that come to mind might be dealing with the wind. If we've got a headwind, if we've got a wind coming at our face, then we're not going to need help on the back cast. The wind is going to help us on the back cast. It's going to carry the cast back behind us. Where the trouble is going to be is turning over that cast on the forward cast. Turning over the forward cast because the wind is going to want to blow it back on us, blow the fly back on the leaders. The leader won't be able to turn over. It's going to puddle out there. So in that situation, we won't need a haul on the back cast, but we will on the forward cast. We may not need it on the back cast, but it's going to help us on the forward cast. Don't need it here, but we need it on the forward cast. That's using a single haul on the forward cast. And the opposite would be true if we had a tailwind. Now we've got the wind coming this way. We're not going to need the help on the forward cast, but now we need it on the back cast. So here's the haul, here's the forward cast. Here's the haul, here's the forward cast. Haul, don't need it coming forward. If you work with this a little bit and get comfortable with your haul, you'll find that this is the one that you'll use almost all of the time. Even picking up a 25-foot cast on your favorite trout stream or pond, just picking up line off the water, if you use a little bit of a haul, you'll find that it just comes off cleaner, quicker, you've got better line speed, you're on your way immediately to make that next cast. It can eliminate false casts. You've got a nice clean cast coming forward with good line speed. And you don't have to work hard at all on making those casts. So single haul, double haul, just get comfortable practicing this and using it whenever you have one of those situations dealing with wind or big flies. Now, a couple things will change when we're talking about distance. Technically, what you're doing with your hands is not going to change. What will change now is the position of our feet and how we move the weight as we shift our weight. Whenever we're picking up a lot of line off the water, we want to remember to keep our rod tip low. Get all of that line moving. As soon as you see your leader moving, you know that it's all moving and the tension has been broken. Then you can pick up that cast and start making your false casts. That's important to remember. As the amount of line increases that we're picking up, we want to increase our casting stroke. So we can do that by keeping the rod tip right down here on the water or on the grass. Long casting stroke, haul, and we're ready to get going again. And maybe you noticed halfway through, I rocked back, shifted my weight back behind me. So by having your right foot slightly behind you, you'll be able to lean back on the back cast as your weight shifts, and the same thing on the forward cast. You can lean into that forward cast as your weight shifts through the cast. So it's very important to remember how you're going to control a lot of line in the air, and you're going to do that with a long casting stroke and by being able to shift your weight to manage that line in the air. The place where we need to shoot line is right here during the haul as our hand is coming back up, as our hands are coming back together. It's exactly the same place during the cast that we shoot line when we're not hauling. In that case, we're shooting line right here at the end of this cast, or here at the end of the forward cast at the very end of either cast. So now that we're incorporating a haul, it's at exactly the same place, but it happens to be as our line hand is coming back up to meet our rod hand. So it's right here, we can shoot line. It's right here. As our hands are coming back together, as your line hand is coming back up from the haul, that's where we release the line. So if we incorporate all of it now, we're going to give ourselves a long casting stroke. We're going to wait until the rod tip has traveled 2/3 of the way through the casting stroke before we include the haul. We're going to shoot line as our hand is coming up from the haul. We're going to have our right foot slightly behind us so we can shift our weight. And we're going to start with our rod tip right down here on the grass where it's going to give us the longest casting stroke. So here we go. Pick it up, haul, shoot, haul, shoot, haul, shoot, haul, shoot. So we've shot about 60 feet of line in, I think, what was that, 2 or 3 casts. And let's look at that again. This is where it's going to be helpful to have that line marked, and you can see how much line you're actually working with. Here's the 25-foot mark coming right into my rod tip. Haul and shoot, 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 haul and shoot. So that's double haul. It's easiest, again, get out in the grass and practice. It's going to be a little bit harder on the water if you're dealing with tides and wind and maybe a boat that's moving. So you want to be very comfortable with the mechanics of hauling before you get to the water, before you get to fishing. But one advantage of being on the water is that we can use the water. We can use that tension from the water to help load the rod as we're picking the line up off the water. We call that a water haul. And it's going to happen right here, which you can't see on the grass. But if we were on the water, you'd be able to see your rod tip bending and loading, and that's going to help us push that line back behind us. We'll look at that when we get to the water. But everything else with the single and the double haul, we can practice on the grass. We can think about the mechanics of the haul so that when we get to the water, we can think about all the other things that go along with fishing.